out of the running for any cabinet position, any administration position.
It is interesting. There's this coterie of folks who are sort of big Trump boosters who seem totally missing. No Chris Christie, no Giuliani. We haven't seen nothing for Newt Gingrich yet.
Yeah.
Mike Huckabee went to Trump Tower, but no nominations for him yet. Is he? Are some of these like people who really put their name behind him getting stiff-armed a bit?
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. And those three you bring up, Joe, are three of the most prominent original people who did support Trump. And, you know, it is certainly notable that they're not high on the list for administration positions. But having said that, there are other people who got behind Trump early that are getting plum positions, like Jeff Sessions, a senator from Alabama, who's been nominated to be attorney general. So it's a mix of both things. I think Trump is taking into consideration some pragmatic aspects of you know, who would be problematic to get through the Senate, who would be a controversial figure that would distract from other things that he does want to do. So I think loyalty matters when it comes to Trump picking people, but it's not all that matters.
Sahil, you had a fascinating story today about how members of Trump's cabinet will personally save a fortune, billions of dollars, if Trump's own plan to get rid of the estate tax passes, because some of these people are wildly wealthy. They would be hit with huge estate tax bills when they pass on their fortune. How much are some of these folks potentially going to save?
Quite a lot of money, Joe. I think Trump himself, based on our assessment of his net worth, which is about $3 billion, would save $500 million. If we look at what the effective estate tax is, which is about 18%, much less than the 40% that is technically assessed, Trump himself would save that much. If he is worth as much as he says he is, his own savings would be about $2 billion. You have several other billionaires who he's chosen to be in his cabinet, including Wilbur Ross, his Commerce Secretary, worth about $2.9 billion. He'd save a lot. Betsy DeVos her father-in-law is a billionaire, and passing on that inheritance would end up saving close to $1 billion for him. And you have other very wealthy people that he has chosen, such as Linda McMahon for the Small Business Administration, who would save a lot of money without an estate tax. So I think it's one of the notable things here, and this is a line of attack that we will see, I'm pretty sure, Democrats pounce on, is that some of Trump's policies, especially his tax policies, especially his estate tax policies, would benefit himself and the people around him, and that tends to be politically potent.
All right, Bloomberg Politics reporter Sahil Kapoor, thank you so much. And of course, it flies in the face of his populist campaign rhetoric. I mean, this one especially. We'll
see how it plays. All right, staying with politics, it's been an interesting week for U.S.-China relations after Trump made contact with Taiwanese President Tsai Ing-wen, and that spurred a bigger discussion about which executives are celebrating a Trump administration.
Yeah, of course, I find it fascinating as well that Tsai Ing-wen's administration published those pictures. They were very quick to do so because her popularity hasn't been great either.
So I caught up with Bloomberg Gadfly columnist Tim Culpen, who wrote a really fascinating story for Gadfly earlier in the week, in which he assumed the voice of the CEO of Foxconn, basically saying, like, look, I'm this big manufacturer. Dear Donald Trump, let me tell you about how manufacturing really works. It's like, you want me to bring a bunch of jobs into the U.S. to make iPhones? This is what you should really know about how complicated manufacturing works. It's much more complicated than people might think.
So he assumes a very candid voice here in telling Trump, this is what factors into my decision-making process.
Right, exactly. It's like, it sounds great, bring manufacturing back to the U.S., but let's talk about some of the complications. So here's a clip of our conversation, and I started by asking him what President-elect Donald Trump can learn from someone like Terry Gou, the CEO of Foxconn, or chairman of Foxconn.
Well, first of all, I guess he'd want to learn exactly how iPhones are made and what's involved, because, the actual assembly of an iPhone, putting two pieces together, which is, the screen and the back, that's just one step in the process. In fact, it's the final step of the process, and it's not a lot of value add there, and they're trying to automate it more and more. So, what he could really learn is that there's a lot more involved in making an iPhone than just that last step. There's many, many, many steps before it, and a lot of the value comes from the whole supply chain, and most of that sits in China. It would be very hard to, emigrate that to the U.S.
Right, as you point out in your piece, Foxconn actually does some manufacturing in Brazil. It was kind of done for political reasons, but it really doesn't bring much value to the Brazilian economy. Why is that?
Well, because they don't actually have that many workers there. I mean, when I say not that many, it's probably around 10 or 20,000. Of course, I know that President-elect Trump would love to be able to tweet that he's bringing 10 or 20,000 jobs to the U.S. to make iPhones. But the reality is that they're not very much value add. And for someone like Foxconn, who has, 1 million workers a year during peak season, it's not many jobs. And really what it is, it's getting two parts of an iPhone and slotting it together like Lego pieces. They don't do a lot more in Brazil beyond that. And that's not really the kind of work that I think Donald Trump would want to bring into the United States. I would assume that he would want to bring in something with a little bit more value add and high-level manufacturing, as he's talked about. And so, what they're doing in Brazil, it does tick all the right boxes. It helps Apple get around import tariffs. It helps, please the local politicians who can tell everybody that they made some jobs here. But really, it won't do a lot for the economy in Brazil.
So essentially what you're saying is it's very easy to tell a story that you're building something somewhere. You could do all of the complicated advanced manufacturing in, say, China, and then leave one last really simple step, do that somewhere else, and you say, voila, we're making the iPhone in Brazil or somewhere else. It doesn't really mean much economically.
Exactly, and in my parody letter from Terry Gore to Donald Trump, I mentioned that if he wanted to, he could build iPhones in Trump Towers. And you know what? That's not even a joke. You could, in theory, you could set up a production line in one of the floors of Trump Towers and build some iPhones. Yeah, you could do that if you wanted to.
Tim, you're in Taipei. Of course, one of the big events that's happened during this transition is Donald Trump having taken a call with the president of Taiwan. How is that being seen there and interpreted by the business community and the press in general?
Well, the Taiwanese people in general may be the only people around the globe actually cheering it, to be honest. The thing is that Taiwanese people see themselves as being an independent sovereign nation. I mean, it acts and functions like a sovereign nation, right? It looks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, so it's pretty much a duck. And, Taiwan has been very close to the United States for many, many years. It is a liberal, democratic country. They've had free elections for 20 years. And so there's a feeling in Taiwan like, hey, we're your kind of people. We are democratic. We've got a capitalist, free-functioning economy. You should be giving us a bit more love than you do now. Why don't you? Well, we know why not, because like every other country in the world, people are beholden to China. It's a very large, powerful country. The economy is very important to any other country around the world, including the United States. Everybody gets the realpolitik in Taiwan. They understand it. But when he went off the reservation and had that phone call, there's certainly cheers in Taiwan.
So obviously all politicians, or most politicians, like to talk about we created manufacturing jobs here. Donald Trump is not unique in that respect. How do huge global companies like Foxconn essentially take advantage of that hunger by politicians to demonstrate that a company has made an investment somewhere? What's the tactics that are used?
Well, it comes down to as simple as this: show me the money, right? Whenever they go into another country, for example, Indonesia is a good example. Terry Gore did have talks with, leadership in Indonesia a few years ago, and he had various, list of wants and needs and demands, including, cheap land, tax rebates, so on and so forth. And so any country that wants to lure someone like Foxconn there really will have to listen to what Terry Gore or whatever leader of that company says and wants, because in the case of Indonesia, for example, they didn't come through with the things that Foxconn said they wanted, and nothing is really proceeding. They will not make iPhones in Indonesia anytime soon because they couldn't come to some kind of agreement. There was basically a stalemate, an impasse.
That was Tim Kolpen, a Bloomberg Gadfly columnist in Taipei, and you can read his column and more and more fast commentary on the Bloomberg at GADF Go. We'll be right back.
Don't miss this. Next week, you've got the big Fed meeting. Well, it once was big, but maybe not so much big anymore because we already know what's going to happen.
Want to see what their outlook is for next year.
All right, the dots will come out, and of course, this might be the one where they do raise interest rates this year.
Certainly, markets are expecting that. And that's not the only central bank decision next week. We have the Bank of England, Swiss Central Bank. Both of them are expected to keep interest rates on hold, but they'll still be interesting to watch.
And don't miss this. U.S. President-elect Donald Trump plans to meet with tech business leaders and hold a press conference to discuss divesting his businesses. That'll be closely watched. He'll also continue to fill in the blanks for cabinet and agency offices. We're still waiting for Secretary of State. And just a few minutes from now, an exclusive interview with U.S. Commerce Secretary Penny Pritzker about the impact of the incoming Trump administration's policies on the tech business.
Courtney Collins, and you're watching Bloomberg Technology. Let's start with a check of your first word news. President-elect Donald Trump is expecting to name Congresswoman Cathy McMorris Rodgers to head the Interior Department. McMorris Rodgers has served 5 terms in the House and is vice chair of the transition team. Meanwhile, the transition team has asked Goldman Sachs President Gary Cohn to lead the National Economic Council. Former New York Mets and Boston Red Sox manager Bobby Valentine is reportedly a candidate to be U.S. ambassador to Japan. And former New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani is no longer on the short list for Secretary of State. He will remain vice chair of the transition team. Meantime, Trump is in Baton Rouge as part of the Get Out the Vote rally in Louisiana for GOP candidates. Saturday's runoff election in the Bayou State is the last in the country for the Senate. And Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell is resisting Coal State Senate Democrats holding up a vote for the stopgap spending bill. The major sticking point is benefits for retired miners. Congress needs to pass stopgap spending by midnight to avoid a partial government shutdown. Coal State lawmakers want a 1-year extension for miner benefits. A vote is expected this weekend. Global news 24 hours a day, powered by more than 2,600 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Courtney Collins. This is Bloomberg. Bloomberg Technology is next.
I'm Caroline Hyde in for Emily Chang. This is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up, Rupert Murdoch could be $14 billion away from the television empire he's always longed for. We'll analyze the 21st Century Fox and Sky TV proposed merger. Plus, the road ahead for tech in the US with Donald Trump in the driver's seat. Commerce Secretary Penny Pritzker joins us for a Bloomberg exclusive. And real-life robots going to war in a virtual game space will introduce you to the augmented reality battlefield called Mechamon. First, to our lead. 21st Century Fox has reached a preliminary deal to buy UK TV giant Sky for $14.1 billion. Shares of 21st Century closed down over 2% after initially surging on the report. And Sky shares closed up, get this, 26%. Now, you'll remember that Rupert Murdoch already owns 39% of Sky and has been trying to increase his stake for years. Joining us now from New York with more on this deal is Bloomberg M&A reporter Alex Sherman. Alex, thanks for joining us. And I remember 6 years ago when this deal first submerged because there were at those times concerns about the phone hacking scandal that embroiled the likes of Rupert Murdoch then. Why is Sky such a tasty asset?
Right, so today's Sky is a little different from the B-Sky B that Sky attempted to buy 6 years ago. and then didn't when the News of the World scandal hit. This Sky is consolidated, so it doesn't only have the UK asset, B Sky B, but also other Sky assets in other countries like Italy and Germany. Sky is both a content distributor and also a content creator. So Fox is now deciding to buy the other 61% it doesn't already own in sort of a similar transaction to AT&T buying Time Warner. It puts together more content and distribution. The only difference here is that A, Fox already owned a minority stake, and B, it's an international transaction. So it definitely increases the heft of Fox, similar to AT&T buying Time Warner. And, you know, Viacom and CBS are now having discussions. It seems to be a trend if you are a media company that you need more scale and you want to get bigger.
Yeah, content clearly king, Alex. But give us a sense of 36 Premium. It looks pretty tasty in terms of what they're offering. But actually, because of the British pound slump, it's actually quite a good time to be getting in for 21st Century Fox. What are the other catalysts, do you think, to the deal right here, right now?
So I'd give you three. One, Brexit pushed down the price of Sky a little bit. And I think this is a bet that Brexit is not going to be sort of a collapsing event for Europe, you know, similar to, say, when Warren Buffett invested in the United States after the financial crisis. Two, the market rise from the Trump rally, I think, has given Fox a sense that doing this deal now is probably not going to collapse their own shares, which have been pushed up in recent months. And then three is that AT&T Time Warner deal. I think that took Time Warner off the table for Fox. You know, followers of Fox, I'm sure, remember just a couple years ago, Fox put out a hostile offer to buy Time Warner. Well, now if Time Warner's off the table for them, they can sort of move their attention away from that and focus on something else. Sky was the obvious thing here. Fox has been fairly public about saying that owning only 39% was not really a long-term relationship. They were either going to buy the rest of it or sell out completely, so it looks today like they're going to buy the rest of it.
Alex Sherman, always great to have you on the show. Bloomberg's M&A reporter, taking us all through what could be this transitional and, of course, across-the-pond deal. Turning to now President-elect Donald Trump's new administration. After tough talk on the campaign trail, visa concerns and diplomatic tension with China, many leaders in Silicon Valley are wondering what will be the impact of the incoming administration's policies on tech. Well, who better to talk through the legacy of the current administration and what the future may hold than Secretary of Commerce Penny Pritzker, here for an exclusive interview. And joining us from New York, one of the most connected guys in tech, and of course, friend of the show, is Bloomberg contributor and chief executive of Techonomy, David Kirkpatrick. Welcome to the show, both of you. Penny, we've got to start with you, Secretary. Thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you
for this time. And Obama has really been quite a truly digital president, really trying to build bridges between Washington and Silicon Valley. Give us a sense. You were on stage. We spoke to you last when you were with Brian Chesky of Airbnb. You two have been connected. Is this always a positive thing? And is that sort of relationship certain with the new administration coming in?
It's absolutely positive, and in fact, it's essential. And the reason for that is President Obama recognized from the beginning the importance of the digital economy and the importance of technology and innovation. And so we've engaged to be real partners with the leaders of the businesses in that area. We've developed digital policy to ensure there's a free and open internet. We've been working on Trust Online to make sure that the privacy and the security and the encryption policies work for both our security of our country, our individual consumers, as well as for the businesses. We've been trying to make sure that there's broadband access for all Americans, which is essential to be effective in the 21st century. We've been focused on a workforce that can not only use the digital tools that are being created, but that is prepared to work in the businesses and with the opportunities being created. And finally, we've engaged with companies, which was what brings me out to here to San Francisco, with companies that are working on new technologies to better understand what they're trying to accomplish and how to interface with the federal government.
Regulatory issues a key question. We've got to bring it out to you, David, because I'm sure you'll have many a viewpoint about what may be the next legacy will bring. What does Donald Trump bring to the table? I'm sure you've got plenty of questions for Penny here.
Well, thank you, Caroline. Yeah, Penny, I guess I was curious, and great to be here with you, by the way.
Thank you.
But, you know, it's so clear that under the Obama administration, and much of it has been your leadership, there's been a real recognition that technology and Silicon Valley internet industry is one of the great flagship industries, perhaps the greatest American flagship industry globally, and a real relationship has been built that shows that Washington finally recognizes that. How robust do you think that relationship is going to be in the next 4 years?
Well, I think what we've tried to do is institutionalize the relationship between the Department of Commerce and the technology community so that they understand the tools that we have in place and how we can be their ally in government policy making, not just here in the United States, but there's a lot of policy that could affect the free and open internet that's going on, negative implications around the world. And so it's really important that we stay engaged, and we've tried to institutionalize that in a number of ways. First of all, through formal councils and boards that we have. We have both a digital economy board of advisors. We have a data advisory board as well. That's where we have private sector members that are giving us feedback on a regular basis. We're also spending a lot of time in the communities. We've also put in place digital attaches in 12 different countries around the world so that we can help our tech companies better navigate the digital challenges that they're seeing, whether it's throughout the ASEAN communities or it's with China or India or Brazil, et cetera. So we've tried to put in place tools, tried to institutionalize the relationships, recognizing, look, the economy has gone digital. I'm not sure what a digital economy is. I think it's our economy and the digital and technology are merging.
I couldn't agree with you more, but I'm just curious, how much are those advisory bodies and digital attaches really institutionalized sufficiently that, because we hear an awful lot about what should happen in coming years, and I think a lot of people are very uncertain of what actually will happen. How institutionalized are those things that you're confident they can continue?
Well, look, I think that the next administration, as best as we can understand from the transition teams that we're working with, understand the importance of that engagement and want to continue it. Exactly what the policies will be, I can't comment, but I think they appreciate the importance of the relationship.
Give us a sense, Secretary, of whether some of the powerhouses of the Silicon Valley have become too powerful. There seems to be suddenly growing in discussion the fact that they need to be acting faster, whether it's about fake news, whether indeed it's about terrorist-related pictures and videos. Has there been perhaps too much regulatory open arms for these sorts of companies?
Well, I think that collaboration is really important, and let me just focus on one area. Let's take cybersecurity, for example. We put out the Cybersecurity Commission report last Friday, which is something I really encourage anyone in the tech community to take a look at. And what it calls for is greater engagement as it relates to addressing cybersecurity. Now, I know sometimes people get concerned about engagement between our companies and the government, but it's very important to protect individuals, their privacy, as well as our national security. We need to find safe mechanisms that we can work together.
And what about, you talked about the global regulatory picture that's being painted. What do you say to Vestager over in the EU? We have seen a lot of activity coming in perhaps what has not always been the most welcoming of arms from the EU. What do you discuss such regulatory moves by the EU?
Absolutely. So take, for example, the EU-US Privacy Shield, which we just negotiated. That was a replacement for what used to be Safe Harbor. That is a way that we can mesh our two different privacy regimes, that in Europe and that here in the United States, so that $290 billion of digital trade can continue and continue to grow. So absolutely, we're in the conversation every day with our counterparts in Europe.
Do you agree with their viewpoints?
Sometimes yes, sometimes no. But the point is that if we don't engage with them and we aren't talking about the implications, they want to continue to enhance their own innovative society. And so we talk about what policies and what are the implications of different policies. But we have to remember, we're dealing with a lot of innovation going on very quickly. And governments are not always at the forefront of that. We're often behind the curve. And it's important, though, that as governments, and look, I'm from the private sector. That's my background. It's important that governments understand the implications of the steps they take. They may have one goal and they may have unintended consequences. And that's where it's really important to have the dialogue, not just between, let's say, the EU and the US, but it's really important the private sector's there as well to give their viewpoint as to what different steps the implications are for different companies.
Secretary Pritzker, David here. What do you think about the President-elect Trump's pick for your replacement, Wilbur Ross, and how do you respond to? Are you doing anything to sort of help make that transition happen already? Is there any discussion underway? And second of all, there's so much talk about protectionism. I'd just love you to briefly talk about that before we let you go.
Well, let me start with the designee for Secretary of Commerce. I've reached out to him, and he said that we will be in contact. I've also written a letter that I will share with him when I meet him, telling him what the things that I wish I had been told when I took this job, things to know about how to operate in Washington. And absolutely, transition is underway. President Obama asked us to do the most professional transition in history, and we're very focused on that and working well with the transition team that's coming after us.
Secretary Pritzker, I've got to ask you, we've seen many people who have come from government potentially take up shop here. I mean, just think of Condoleezza Rice over with Dropbox. We've had Lisa Jackson, who's the EPA, now with Apple. Potential for a job with you in San Francisco, Silicon Valley. What's next for you?
Well, I'd like to go back to the private sector, but obviously I haven't been able to figure that out while I'm in this job because it creates too many conflicts. So I look forward to all kinds of possibilities in that way.
The jobs will come rolling in, I'm sure. David, a last question for you.
Well, I want to thank you for joining us, and I guess I just would love you to briefly touch on this protectionism issue because it's so much in the rhetoric of the incoming administration, and I know it's something you've worked so hard for a more open attitude. Can you just talk about that a little?
Well, I think that the United States cannot close itself off to trade. We're only 5% of the customers in the world. 95% are outside the United States. So, and if we act in a protectionist manner, what I've been told by my counterparts around the world, they'll have to retaliate. So that's not a good cycle to get in. That's a negative cycle. So it's important that we figure out a way to engage where we improve the ability and the opportunity for the average American, which I think is what the president-elect is focused on. He wants more of our goods made here and bought here, which is a great aspiration. We just need to figure out how to do that in a way where we're not putting up a barricade around our country, but instead engaging with the rest of the world.
Talking about barricades, you've just come from Mexico. We understand you've been with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. What was the dialogue like? Are you optimistic? Are you pessimistic? How are the people on the ground?
Well, I was really actually quite optimistic by the attitude of the Mexican government. They're very mature, and they realize that engagement is important. They recognize that NAFTA is an agreement that was made 22 years ago. They know there are enhancements that can be made to that. We, in fact, negotiated a number of those enhancements in TPP. So there's opportunity to improve the engagement. The business leaders there, they're nervous because it's unclear how things will proceed. But my hope is that there'll be time when the folks are in place and the new government, our new administration is in place, to really sit down and talk specifics about how to continue to grow the over $600 billion of trade we do back and forth with Mexico. 40% of what Mexico exports are American-made content. So we can't forget that our economies are inextricably intertwined. So we have to figure out how to make it better, but not rip it up.
And there seems to be an ongoing discussion worldwide between EU, UK, and indeed here with the US and Mexico. It's been wonderful having your time, Secretary Pritzker. We can't thank you enough for giving so much on what is a very busy schedule. We wish you all the well for the best and the rest of your remaining days in office. Thank you very much indeed. And of course, David Kirkpatrick, CEO of Techonomy, is going to be sticking with me.
Thank you, Secretary.
Now, still to come, innovation in drones. Well, it's flying ahead faster than the rules that govern it. What the US aerospace industry expects under a new transportation secretary next. This is Bloomberg. Turning to the skies, a government watchdog report this week found that the US aviation regulators are approving commercial drone applications too quickly, in some cases missing safety violations. It's an example of how the incoming Department of Transportation is inheriting oversight of the drone industry at a challenging time. Joining us now from New York to discuss is drone regulation expert Greg McNeil. He's CEO of aerospace communication company AirMap. Wonderful to have you on the show. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. And first of all, you've written some incredible pieces, Greg, talking about potentially the future of airspace, and perhaps we shouldn't be thinking about automated cars, but automated aircraft. Would we be being carried in these things? Why is it going to be so crucial to the economy going forward?
Yeah, we do believe in a future where eventually you'll walk outside and you'll hail an Uber, and instead of it driving up, an autonomous vehicle will land in front of your home, and you'll get into that vehicle and fly to your destination. One thing my co-founder and CEO, so Ben's the CEO, I'm the co-founder. One thing that we say is that if you can deliver a package, you can deliver a person, and we believe pretty deeply in that. But to get to that future, what we really need is an unmanned traffic management system, systems of automation that will allow this to happen. I think that's part of the challenge that DOT is going to face, one part automation and the other part air traffic control reform.
Talking about the challenges that they face, you've worked very closely with Secretary Fox. The current administration have been rightly trying to tackle the automation situation. But what do you think of the new elect, the nominee for the position in transportation, for Elaine Chao? What do you think about the future?
Yeah, I think most of us in the industry, and I'd count myself as part of this consensus, is very bullish on the appointment of Elaine Chao. She brings a lot of experience to the table. Something else that she brings to the table is a willingness to address the types of existing things, the legacy types of ways of thinking about problems that exist in agencies, and pause for a second and say, is that necessary to be reformed? Does it have to stick around? She did this in her prior jobs, and we really think that she's going to do this in her future position, helping us reform air traffic control and helping us find ways of automation that will not only help industry succeed, but may also actually make the airspace much more safe.
So, Greg, talk to me about potentially this on a global perspective, because when I look at the US when it comes to regulation, well, I saw Amazon having to go to the United Kingdom, where I come from, and indeed from Canada having to go and test its drones rather than here in the US because regulation couldn't keep up quickly enough. Is the US becoming a much more welcoming place for this sort of?
Yeah, there's an amazing amount of sort of global commercial arbitrage going on right now across jurisdictions. For a while, the United States, internally, companies were criticizing the FAA for being behind Europe, being behind Canada. Then all of a sudden, new regulations came out over the summer. America leaped ahead. The FAA administrator said that it's America's goal to lead on regulations in the unmanned aircraft space. And then immediately we saw that Canada decided that they were going to reform their regulations. Australia's in the process of reforming their regulations. Europe is in the process of reforming their regulations. And so there's this wonderful competition going on in the marketplace, not only amongst companies, but also amongst jurisdictions who are trying to be first to have unmanned traffic management systems where drones can fly autonomously and deliver amazing value to people. It's really something that's very exciting, and I think that's why we're starting to see so much investment in the space.
And we'll see that investment potentially thrive as we see companies such as yourself born out of an accelerator in the area. We'll see how that continues to progress. Thank you very much indeed. AirMap co-founder Greg McNeil joining us. And for more on Bloomberg Technology, coming up next. President Obama has officially ordered an investigation into hacking attacks related to the 2016 presidential election. Now, the report will be provided to Congress, but not necessarily made public. It'll look at the impact that hacking by Russia may have had on results. Cybersecurity companies, including FireEye and CrowdStrike, have confirmed the role of Russian hackers in this year's DNC hack. However, President-elect Trump, well, rather unsurprisingly, has expressed some skepticism about the country's involvement. And Michigan now has the first set of comprehensive statewide self-driving car rules in the U.S. In addition to testing, well, the law allows the creation of a network of on-demand autonomous vehicles. However, the rules say that only motor vehicle manufacturers are allowed to operate such a network. Well, that means Uber, Google couldn't do this. But GM, Ford and Fiat Chrysler, well, they can. Now, a reminder that all episodes of Bloomberg Technology are live streaming on Twitter. Check us out at Bloomberg Tech TV, weekdays at 5 p.m. in New York. That's 2 p.m. in San Francisco. And we'll be digging into much more of the tech news. We've got so much on the world of robotics coming up for you next. And indeed, a tech roundup of the week, discussing that all-important deal with SoftBank. This is Bloomberg.
I'm Courtney Collins, and you're watching Bloomberg Technology. Let's begin with a check of your first word news. President-elect Donald Trump is in Louisiana today stumping on behalf of the Republican candidate in the nation's final Senate race. At a rally in Baton Rouge, he promised a new era in the oil and energy sector.
Our plan begins with bold structural reform to create millions of really good-paying jobs. And we're going to see refineries, and we're going to see pipelines, and we're going to see lots of things happening.
Trump also said there would be consequences for companies that leave the country and then try to ship products back to the United States. Today's surprise decision by the top leader in Hong Kong not to seek another term could clear the field for a chief executive who would bridge deep differences the city has with China. Chief Executive Leung says he's stepping aside at the end of his 5-year term because of family concerns. The U.S. is bracing for a period of uncertainty in South Korea after the impeachment of President Baek Geun-hye, a key ally. Lawmakers, including dozens from Baek's own party, voted overwhelmingly to remove her from office. South Korea's first female leader offered this apology.
This afternoon, Parliament passed the presidential impeachment motion. I deeply apologize to our citizens for causing such a big national confusion amid national security and economic concerns due to my carelessness.
Baek is suspended from power with the country's prime minister assuming interim leadership. Hundreds of Syrian civilians fled the eastern region of Aleppo on foot today in the wake of relentless shelling by government troops. The UN says it's concerned about reports that hundreds have gone missing after crossing into government-controlled areas of Aleppo. It estimates about 100,000 civilians are trapped in areas under the control of armed opposition groups. A new report into systemic Russian doping details a wide-ranging institutional conspiracy involving more than 1,000 athletes across more than 30 sports. The report from the World Anti-Doping Agency includes evidence corroborating large-scale sample swapping in the 2014 Sochi Winter Olympics. The Russian Sports Ministry has denied any state-sponsored doping system. Rats now outnumber humans in Paris 2.5 to 1. One estimate pegs the number of rodents in the City of Light at 6 million. Officials have closed some parks and trash bins are being redesigned to keep rats out. And space hero and former U.S. Senator John Glenn will lie in state in the Ohio State House. A memorial service is also being planned at Ohio State University. His funeral will take place at Arlington National Cemetery. He died yesterday at the age of 95. Global news 24 hours a day, powered by more than 2,600 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Courtney Collins.
This is Bloomberg Technology. I'm Caroline Hyde, in for Emily Chang. Now, from the pledge of SoftBank's Masayoshi Son to investing a whopping $50 billion into the U.S., all the way to Facebook shareholders crying foul over the company's new stock class, there has been no shortage of tech news this week. Joining us to break it down, this and these topics for more, there's Bloomberg's global head of technology coverage, Brad Stone, in the studio with me. Thank you very much, Brad. And still with us, of course, from New York is David Kirkpatrick, Bloomberg contributor and chief executive of Techonomy. Guys, let's hit it up. Let's first of all start with the SoftBank deal. $50 billion going into startups. Brad, give us your sense of where this money might be flowing.
Well, first of all, Masa is a very smart man and really provided a model for what U.S. technology executives should do in this meeting with Donald Trump later, perhaps next week. I mean, he had already committed to raising and spending $100 billion on technology. Obviously, half of that was going to go to U.S. tech startups. So he goes and meets with Donald Trump, does his press conference in the lobby of Trump Tower, commits half that money to U.S. startups, no specifics, no contract signed, promises 50,000 jobs, a promise that will never be vetted. No one will ever return to it. And SoftBank stock goes through the roof, partly because people are predicting now he might have a clear path to merging Sprint with T-Mobile. So a great move, great optics. I don't know if there's a lot of substance there.
Nice PR coup, if there is one. David, give us a sense. It's interesting. We saw potentially Sprint move. We saw then actually Deutsche Telekom in Germany, which owns US T-Mobile, also shares up about €4 billion in market cap this week. There's a lot of hope, but is M&A going to be a clear path under the new administration?
Well, there's certainly a good reason to think that antitrust enforcement is going to be much more understanding, shall we say, under a Trump administration, although what is exactly going to happen under a Trump administration remains everybody's guess. I think it's a little bit humorous and probably compelling what Brad said, really advocating that tech leaders, maybe business leaders generally need to start adopting more of a reality TV approach to their own behavior, which is effectively what Masayoshi Son has done, basically just coming out in a theatrical way, saying something that he had already said elsewhere or that wasn't really new. It plays the game that we are now essentially playing, I guess, in our public life. I'm not sure how it will help the tech industry actually advance, but it's a shrewd strategy, no doubt.
Playing that game, and the game is going to be played all this week, of course. Coming up, we've got the executives coming over to Trump Towers. Brad, what do you expect? Who's going to be there?
Well, I mean, I think they're all going to go, right? Because this is the world that we all live in. So I don't think you could say no to the president-elect. I think if you're Tim Cook and you're looking at the Masa playbook, that you're thinking, maybe...
What I already announced.
Well, maybe I do go in there and talk about, in some way, bringing manufacturing back into the United States. At least saying something, having some announcement, whether it's real or not. I mean, we know that the CEO of Cisco is going, the COO of Oracle. It'll be curious to see if we see Eric Schmidt from Google there or Jeff Bezos from Amazon. I mean, these are two executives who have kind of, took stands against Donald Trump. Now they have to work with him. We know that the president-elect is someone who can prosecute grudges, and so I think they go and they listen, and maybe they try to offer something that fits into his agenda. Interesting
if Twitter would go, considering he prosecutes those judgments via Twitter and that medium. David, you know very well, very intimately, Facebook. Do you think Mark Zuckerberg would be tempted over? Do you think he's got the invite?
Well, I think if you're summoned, you're probably going to go. But I would slightly say that I diverge with Brad, maybe. I don't think they're going to talk. I think they're going to listen whether they like it or not. And my own very, very strong prediction is that what Trump wants to talk to them about is security, fighting terrorism, how they're going to do what he wants them to do, in his opinion, to open up their networks when requested, which a number of these companies have shown tremendous resistance to, and there's a lot of concern on the part of their customers about what they might agree to. But this delivering on the anti-terrorism fight is what Trump promised so fervently and repeatedly during the campaign. I know that has got to be on his mind in this meeting.
Brad, is it being factored into share prices as yet, all this uncertainty, what regulatory hurdles or lack thereof might suddenly come in the way of helping M&A grow in certain industries, but maybe when it comes to social media, slightly tougher line? Are we seeing that being reflected by investors and concerns?
It's tough to say. I think in that first week when we saw some weakness in the Amazon share price, people were thinking that maybe this new regime was going to be difficult for some of the big tech companies, but so much else is happening right now. The market has obviously done quite well. It's been a great holiday season for some of these tech companies, so it's really difficult to say right now if they're being impacted.
And maybe he's more of a listener than many expected. He has started to change his tune from perhaps his bark is worse than his bite. David, when it comes to Facebook, once again, we have them in the headlines, the spotlight, the fact that many investors are now slightly worried about the board and whether they've always been on the side of the shareholders or maybe sometimes on the side of Mark Zuckerberg. Talk to us a little bit about Mark Andreessen and whether these sorts of concerns are something that should be listened to.
Well, we've seen this week the release through a lawsuit of some extremely provocative text messages between Mark Andreessen and Mark Zuckerberg that happened while Mark Zuckerberg was talking to a subcommittee of the board that was attempting to represent the outside investors' interests in when he was attempting to change the structure of his own stock so he could retain control if and when he were able to give away all his stock to his philanthropy. And Andreessen clearly was coaching him to try to convince the others. The interesting part of it, among other things, was that there was some suggestion that Zuckerberg had tried to get some kind of exemption for his own political action if he were to go into government, which, frankly, I think is a little bit of a red herring, but it's highly intriguing that that would be the one exemption that he should have asked for. It comes as a huge surprise to me to think that he would even think of such a thing, because it's so evident, it seems, that he wants to stay at Facebook for the duration. But certainly Andreessen's getting a lot of criticism. He's being sued, and, this is not a good thing. for him.
How big could this story become, Brad?
Well, it's so complicated, right? And the story was co-written by my colleague Sarah Fryer, and basically, you know, Mark Zuckerberg is negotiating with a committee that is supposed to represent shareholders. Mark Andreessen, a well-known venture capitalist and a Facebook board member, is on that committee, and it turned out via these text messages that we now see because of the shareholder lawsuit that he had this back channel and was really helping Mark Zuckerberg complete these negotiations when he should have been representing shareholders. And I think it goes to a trend in Silicon Valley where these board members and venture capitalists are falling all over themselves to be founder friendly. They're getting a lot of deals, they're getting a lot of power because of that attitude, but we see that it can hurt shareholders. And I think in a case like a Theranos or a Hampton Creek or a Zenefits, some of these companies where the founders have kind of gotten a little bit out of control, it's hurt the community, it's hurt investors, and I think that's the real impact.
David, you wrote the book on Facebook. Does Mark Zuckerberg care?
Well, he cares about his image. There's no question about that. And I think he cares about Andreessen staying on the board. I actually don't think shareholders were hurt by this. I sadly disagree with my friend Brad. I don't really think that necessarily what Andreessen did was even so terrible. I think it's highly embarrassing. But in fact, you know, the shareholders ought to thank their lucky stars that Zuckerberg is who he is. He's delivered them unbelievable value and almost certainly will continue to do so for an extended period.
And I wasn't saying that Facebook shareholders were hurt. I'm saying that this is the kind of behavior that kind of disenfranchises investors. And in the context of another company where you don't have a visionary founder like a Mark Zuckerberg, this is a kind of board activity that's really not representing the little guys, and it can hurt those investors.
Yeah. Well, potentially. But, you know, I think the reality is many of these boards are comprised of people who were handpicked by these founders and whose job is to basically support them. And I'm not even sure that, considering that and despite the fact that it's a public company, that looking at those texts, that I think it's inappropriate myself.
Bit of friendly fire. We like that. We like a bit of debate on the show. Thank you very much indeed, Brad Stone. Always great to get your opinion while you're here, of course. Global Head of Technology joining us here from Bloomberg, and none other than David Kirkpatrick, of course, Chief Executive at Techonomy, who's staying with me. Now, another story we're watching when it comes to telecoms, content once again king. Orange, a major French phone company, is said to have begun talks with Vivendi to buy pay TV unit Canal+. This, according to people familiar with the matter, and the deal would be the latest in what has become an industry trend of merging mobile networks with traditional pay television companies. No structure for the deal has been decided, and the companies might instead agree to a partnership. But Orange is in particular interested in Canal+'s businesses in Poland and Africa, but the carrier is also expanding itself as wireless competition weighs on prices in France. Check out shares of Vivendi popping at word of that deal. Coming up now, one UK startup is putting their real robots in a digital world. How? Well, by combining their bots with augmented reality. A chat about VR and robots at the same time. What more could you ask for from a tech show? We'll take a look at the Reach Robotics next. This is Bloomberg. Turning to robotics. Now, I'm sure many of you are already being pestered for robot toys this festive season, or maybe even eyeing one up for yourself. Now, a hybrid of robots and augmented reality called Mechamon is getting ready to hit the market. Bloomberg Technology's Ian King did battle with a new toy.
When we were young, we all thought of, oh, I want to have a Transformers in real life, or I want to have this amazing robot in real life. And then when the technology is actually there to implement it, no one is doing it.
Reach Robotics, a UK-based startup, is creating an entirely new gaming platform called Mechamon, short for Mechanical Monster. It combines robots and augmented reality.
Growing up in Nigeria, I was very inspired by wildlife, but then my passion for gaming as well, and for Japanese designs and robotics, all of that coming together. The better a robot can move, the better it can interact with the world around it. There are some specific inspiration that we've taken from nature. If you look at a spider's leg, by having the multiple degrees of freedom and having something that can react that fast, that means you can change direction quite quickly.
So we've seen how cool it is to move it around, but we really want to kill something now. Why do we need the little carpet square?
That's where we build the world from you know, rubble to an alien spaceship.
Silas's app uses augmented reality like Pokemon Go does, but takes it one step further by putting his real-life robots in a virtual game space.
And that's the robot now taking a hit from our opponent. From a virtual opponent, and the robot is reacting.
We've got to fight back, right?
Yeah, I can fire a missile against it. Gone will be the days of just overlaying an image into the real world. Augmented reality should look at the world you're in and then adapt to it.
So he's telling us he's won. And
yeah, he's telling us he's won, and he's very excited, and you know, come on for the next challenge, basically. My robot now does different things in the way it interacts with the virtual opponents and the way it interacts with my friend's robot. There you go, take it for a spin, and I'll grab my robot as well, and we can have a battle.
For now, the augmented reality function only works in single-player mode, but multiple robots can battle each other in real life. Okay, bring it on, right? Yeah. Bring it on. Charge! Whoa. So you're taunting me now?
Yeah, so this is me taunting you, like, come at me, bring it.
Okay, so we're firing, lined up, bang, got you.
Yeah.
It's brilliant.
Good game.
Starting in January 2017, a limited number of these mechanical monsters will be available for purchase, perhaps finally delivering affordable robot carnage. I'm surprised you get any work done with these in the office.
Yeah, it takes some self-discipline.
Now, maybe even I'm pretty tempted for Christmas. Now, that was Bloomberg's Ian King. Now, sticking with robotics, we live in a world where some may be experiencing automation anxiety, caused by expectations of an era in which robots will do all the work, leaving us humans unemployed, broke, and, well, pretty bored. But automation has already erased many manufacturing jobs in America and is now threatening transportation, warehouse work, and routine white-collar work. Even us journalists seem to have the writing done for our articles by robots now. So it rather leaves you wondering, what job will exist in the future? For more on the story, Bloomberg's Rebecca Greenfield, and is still with us is Techonomy Chief Executive David Kirkpatrick. We've got to get into this story, Rachel, because it really is pretty fascinating stuff. And first of all, break down for us, Rebecca, a sheer scale of jobs that have, in fact, already disappeared in manufacturing, and why potentially the jobs that Donald Trump is promising are maybe a figment of his imagination.
Yeah, so depending on which study you look at, about 88% of the jobs lost to manufacturing since the peak of manufacturing in the 70s has been because of automation. Now, trade has taken a lot of those jobs, which is something that Donald Trump does like to focus on. But robots in factories are doing jobs for a lot cheaper, and you need a lot fewer humans to build the robots to do those jobs, and they're really productive. So in that same time, America has actually become much more productive, and we're the second largest manufacturing producer in the U.S. I mean, in the world.
David, chime in here, because it's interesting. It has become something in the mental psyche. There's a worry now potentially about jobs and about the future with Ubers and the Airbnbs and the fact that maybe people aren't nearly as necessary as they once were. What are your views on this?
Well,
sort of
I think
theme?
Rebecca's on the right topic. This probably is becoming the single most fraught issue in technology, and I do think it's quite connected to our political environment, because even if people haven't actually seen jobs replaced by automation, they sense that it's likely, and with everyone having a smartphone and sensing just how amazing it is, and using Siri or Facebook, Google Home or Amazon's Echo devices, they realize that there's this AI and robotic stuff all around them that has enormous power, and it has had impacts in industry after industry. I mean, I remember the first time I ever rode on the little train at San Francisco Airport, and that was like 10 years ago, and there's no driver there. That's the beginning of something that continues and will continue. The question is how we respond to it, and I think Rebecca's done some interesting thinking and writing about that, but the answers are tough when it comes to how we really should respond as a nation and as a world.
So, Rebecca, if Donald Trump was to respond to this and see perhaps manufacturing isn't the easiest place to start building up jobs numbers, where should he look? Where are the jobs safe? Where's going to be expanding?
So the jobs that are safest, if you think about it, are jobs that robots are really bad at least for now. And those are things that humans are really good at. So that's things like empathy and human connection. And a lot of the fastest growing industries and jobs in the U.S. are things that do involve a lot of that. So things like nursing, home health aides, physical therapists. And those jobs range in what they pay, obviously. But even within the business world, companies are saying that these so-called soft skills or non-cognitive skills are becoming even more important, because as jobs replace some of the stuff we do in the workplace, you still need people to work across teams and work with people. So we need to be focusing on those skills, which President-elect Donald Trump has not mentioned.
David, are the tech giants starting to vocalize this enough? Are we starting to hear about what the utopia could be, the fact that maybe everyone just works a little less hard? What sort of future can they paint that doesn't make everyone more fearful in this age of increased populism and concern, not only here in the United States, but across the Atlantic and throughout Europe?
I think it's hard to come up with a really good, reassuring narrative right now. I think it's possible to say things that are kind of promising, but the real problem is that a lot of the jobs that might be created in this more empathetic human world that Rebecca's talking about, which I do agree with, are not necessarily going to be able to be performed by the people whose jobs are being lost in the factories that are being automated. It's a different kind of person, and those factory workers may not want to be trained for that. And even if they did, we don't really have those training systems in our country very well developed. So I worry about that. But I do think there are some positive signs. We at Techonomy just published an article about a concept called the trusted advisor, which is a new kind of job that one of our writers has suggested will come into existence as more and more information is assembled around us by the Internet of Things, etc., and remote advisors may be tapping into the data about us and then tell us how to better live our lives. Could be a new job category entirely.
Fascinating. Something more we need to be digging in with you. Techonomy Chief Executive David Kirkpatrick. Bloomberg's Rebecca Greenfield, a brilliant story. I urge you to go onto Bloomberg.com to dig into that story more that she's put out there. And remember, Bloomberg Television brings you the best interviews from the week, including an extended conversation with the media magnate Arianna Huffington. Her thoughts on Facebook's fake news controversy and the presidential election. Tune in this Saturday for that conversation. And Monday on Bloomberg Technology, we're joined by the founder of Google Ventures, Bill Maris, for an exclusive interview. This is Bloomberg. In this edition of Out of This World, Japan has launched a much-needed capsule of supplies to the International Space Station. Check out those pictures. This after the Russian rocket was destroyed last week, shortly after liftoff. This latest shipment includes nearly 5 tons of food, water and supplies like lithium-ion batteries for the station's solar power system. The capsule will arrive on Tuesday. And here in San Francisco, Mayor Ed Lee is working with tech leaders to raise $30 million to fight homelessness, a problem that's been made worse by soaring housing costs. Salesforce Chief Executive Mark Benioff said he plans to match $10 million in donations. Now, that does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. And remember, all episodes of Bloomberg Technology are now live streaming on Twitter. That's all for now. Thank you for having me. Emily Chang is back on Monday. This is Bloomberg.
studios in New York City, this is Charlie Rose.
Brian Moynihan is here. He is chairman and CEO of Bank of America. It is the nation's second largest bank, trailing only J.P. Morgan Chase. Under his leadership, the company has pivoted from the financial crisis following years of costly litigation. Bank of America's success continues to hinge largely on the fate of the U.S. economy. The incoming Trump administration has signaled it will roll back some financial regulation and pursue a massive pro-growth agenda. Over the last month since the election, Bank of America's share price has risen more than 30%. I'm pleased to have Brian Moynihan back at this table. Welcome.
Oh, thank you, Charlie. It's great to be here again. Thank you.
We've got many things to talk about. So why has your stock price risen 30% since the election?
Well, I always say it's good management, but nobody quite gives me credit. But I think if you really think about it, think about what the election sort of marked for people. You know, from a technical sense, you know, interest rates will go up, and they've risen in anticipation of a better economy.
That should happen in this month.
Yeah, and I think, you know, the Fed's been signaling, and we'll see. It'd be sort of a surprise if it didn't, quite frankly. But rates going up, but mostly a view that maybe regulation, even if it goes backwards, it will stop going forward, and that you'll have a more balanced discussion, and that's good for the bank's ability to return capital. And then the third thing is just growth. I mean, at the end of the day, you know, capitalism succeeds and growth comes and the economy grows, and then the banks help facilitate that real economy. So that is good for banking, and if you believe the U.S. is going to be particularly successful, Bank of America is your place to be.
So the rise in interest rates will certainly serve a dramatic increase in your revenue?
Yeah, off the third quarter, it was worth about $5 billion pre-tax income a year if rates moved up 100 basis points. So it's a significant amount of revenue increase. It's been a long time at low rates, and the business model does better in a little bit higher rate structure. From a consumer or company side, Charlie, you know, the rate structure is still very low and very accommodative to activity. You know, it's just because they raise the Fed funds rate maybe 25 basis points, it's going from 50 to 75. That's still very low in a historical context, extremely low in a historical.
Is the marketplace generally, not just your stock, in response to the Trump possibilities?
I think if talking to CEOs of companies, both public and small companies and everything in between, if you think about last year at this time, the statistics weren't that different. The forward projections of growth weren't that different. The interest rate projections weren't that different. But there was almost a glass half empty mentality around business, just worried whether people were trying to support them to do the work they needed to do. I think the election changed that in the eyes of business. And so if you see the different surveys of business owners and managers and small business owners and consumers, you don't have to guess at it. The facts are there in front of you. Even the Bloomberg Confidence Index today moved up again. And so there's that enthusiasm. So now it's glass half full. Everything that was going wrong now is going right. And that, I think, will lead to more activity.
You know the new Secretary of Treasury nominee?
I don't know him well personally. I have some teammates that know him better. And we've, you know, I think, you know, Mr. Trump's pulling together his team. And I think all of us in the industry and across industry are trying to interface and try to be helpful.
What do you think of Trump?
Honestly, I don't know him personally. I think if you back off what he represents is a belief that we've got to drive growth and drive this company's success. And I think that obviously played well in the election cycle. And, you know, so what's our job as a company? Last time I was here, we had the fellow that played King George in Hamilton. Right. It reminded me of the story I tell once in a while. Yeah. That says, you know, we've been around for a lot of elections as a company, some tough ones. That one in 1800 was pretty tough, and our company was here. You know, so our job is to make the country successful, make the president successful. So we're going to work to try to make it happen. And I think, you know, there's a lot of work we can do.
What will he do that you think will stimulate growth? Is it tax reform? Is it changing, creating jobs? Is it trade? Is it what? Is it the stimulus package he might get Congress to pass, which is a Republican Congress in both the House and the Senate?
Yeah, and I think if you think of what people are pointing out to in that enthusiasm, it's probably three basic tenets. Tax reform, which has two elements to it. Lower rates and the repatriation of dollars from outside. That's one. The second element is regulatory balance, having a fair interchange across all industry for the cost-benefit of regulation and smart, responsible regulation. And I'd say the third is really there's an enthusiasm and an idea that it's okay for a company to be successful because it's tied to adding workers and growing, and that's been something that's not been talked about that much.
Do you believe a 4% growth in the GDP is possible?
You know, our experts are 2% next year, and I think getting from 2 to 3, let's do that.
Yeah.
Then we'll worry about 3 to 4. We're a big economy.
Mr. Mnuchin talks about that as the goal.
Yeah, well, I think it's good to have a strong goal, but I think we got to incrementally make sure the two happens. Because last year this time you probably had people predicting 2, 2.25, and it ended up in a 1 point something high near 2, but it didn't end up there. So I think the key is just to get the places set to get there. This is a big economy. It's an $18 trillion economy. So you're 5 times bigger, 6 times bigger than Germany. So if that engine turns, from 2 to 3, that's a lot of activity. That's bigger than most economies in the world. And so I don't worry about what it could be. I worry about keep making sure it doesn't go backwards and goes forward.
Was the TPP a bad trade deal?
I'd say that I think history will tell us that. I think the interesting question when you think about it is TPA went through. Right. So the concept of a bilateral and stuff, there's a lot more power in the executive branch under TPA than there ever was about trade. So this is going to be a fascinating question as that plays through. I think the debate on TPP, I'll let the experts have it. I think the view of bad deals.
Republicans have been in favor of free trade.
Absolutely. And so, the Business Roundtable, which I'm a part of, we're all trying to get trade passed because trade's generally good for America and generally good to create jobs. It just gets lost in the sort of job relocation question and got derailed on that. So that's
but was it wrong? I mean, was the job relocation question, are those people who opposed TPP right in saying that trade deals hamper jobs and mean the creation of job loss?
I think you can get experts on both sides that come to conclusions. The question, I think, is to think of trade, to think about the globalization. The globalization has occurred. You can't pull that back. And so at the end of the day, we have to be competitive as America, and we have to find the jobs that we're going to win on a global basis. And there are very defined places where we can win. And we have to reposition people into those jobs. And that's a long period of time. And so I can get experts. I can read expert material that says it did have job loss on manufacturing content. I can get expert material that says it didn't. And I'm not sure which to believe, but the real outcome is no matter what happens, you've got to be able to train people into the jobs that are going to be valuable at the price we want people to earn in the United States, which is higher than any place in the world. We got to have jobs that are valuable in that, and I think that's where a lot of the training and thought process has to go. As to how do we find competitive jobs in the United States that will survive in a global economy against other people who are willing to have their populations work for less.
How do we do that?
Well, I think it's training. I think it's capabilities. This is a great country.
This is education.
Think of it. We're down to the 4% unemployment level. It's not like we have an employment crisis in this country. And wage growth, even though there's a lot of talk about
wage growth. This all happened in the Obama administration, 8 years of the Obama administration.
It did, and it should carry through.
Who was not perceived to be a friend of business by definition.
Yeah, and the question will play out and will be answered sometime 20 years from now, as all these questions actually get answered, is could have gone faster or slower, and did certain activities speed it up or slow it down? And we'll see that play out. But the economy has been relatively solid in the United States, and the unemployment level is low. And so, but if you ask people, you'd say, is the job quality what we want? And then, if we got the population going through responsible immigration policies and things like that, you can actually have the country grow faster. The unique thing about the United States is we had both population growth and we're a big developed country. That population growth has slowed by half and maybe picking back up. And that gets in the complexity of immigration. But the reality is we need more people than we're producing because we can employ them. And if we can do that, we can make that happen. It's just we have to channel them into the right job.
One of the interesting things about what's happening in the world is populism. Do you see, let's start with Brexit, for example. What impact does that have on decision-making that you have to make about Bank of America?
Well, you know, if
number of employees you might have in London or whatever it might be.
There's technical issues if the EU piece, you know, the Brexit, Britain separates from the EU. We have to figure out how to operate as if they're two separate enterprises, where now we can do one. So that's pretty technical, but I'd probably back off a little bit of that and think, what is that really? There are two things to think about. One is when you run a big company, the uncertainty of an election cycle, the unpredictability, the polls being wrong consistently, one after another. Italy again this week, it became clear it might not go through, but for a long time, people said, oh, it's going to go through, don't worry. But I think it's interesting, if you watch the market reaction now, they are basically saying the unpredictable outcome is the predictable outcome.
Yeah.
So if you think about it, Brexit, a couple days down, right back, because people said, you know what, life will go on. U.S. election, Italy election, the French first round. And so I think as you think about this, you know, what hopefully it'll signal is that governments are going to do what's in the best interest of their people. And I think people have to believe that in the political rhetoric that says the outcome's this wide, it's actually always much narrower. And I think that'll play out. But when you run a big company, you have to be prepared for the worst outcome. Unfortunately, it's been, in some ways, the unstable outcome has been true in all these, but not much happened. That's the interesting part.
Talk about regulation. I mean, I just saw this in the Wall Street Journal. Banks to Donald Trump, don't kill Dodd-Frank. Is that your attitude?
Well,
I mean, in other words, the question is, what kind of regulation pullback would banks advocate?
So I think when you read a headline like that, you know, in a straightforward terms, it's basically saying the regulation said we should have more capital so we don't have the instability around an economic crisis, have more liquidity so we can survive, have everybody under the tent. In other words, that if you remember back at the crisis, there was a whole bunch of companies we were trying to work through, Bear Stearns, Merrill Lynch, Country, they're outside the tent that we had to bring in the tent. They're all inside the tent. And I think what we're saying is be careful. If you don't have that in place, what you end up having is a dispersion of the industry. And then it's hard to, for lack of a better term, keep track of where the issues are and also get them taken care of. And so a lot of the principles of Dodd-Frank were absolutely geared to the right way to address the issues at the time. The question then, and the hard question is the insurance policy worth the potential growth? If you have more capital...
Does Dodd-Frank restrict growth?
I get asked this question a lot, and you're trying to explain it to a lot of people. So the analogy I came up with, and whether it's perfect or not, is if you think of our company and how we have to have capital levels, let's say that you and I are running a shirt business, and we had 10 factories. What Dodd-Frank, what the rules say, Dodd-Frank plus the rules, say about our shirt manufacturing company, the Charlie Rose Brian Moynihan Shirt Company, is that we could only operate 7 shirt factories. 3 we had to leave idle for that very unusual time when there might be enough demand I have to fill it.
Right.
We never want a shortage of shirts. So then the question is, well, what if it was 2 extra shirt factories instead of 3? That difference for us, just to put it now in numbers, would be $16 billion of capital or $160 billion of loans we could make. So it doesn't mean you have no insurance. That would be 2 out of 9 or 2 out of 7, so it's 30% type of 25, 30%. But think about that. Instead of having 3 idle factories, just for that once-in-a-lifetime chance or once in 100 years or whatever, that I would be able to produce enough shirts to meet that demand, I have to have those 3, I'll have 2. And that's $160 billion of loans. That would help growth. And so that's the debate, is the insurance policy set right? And then there's the implementation of regulation and work around it. But if you think about it, the other thing I'd say, Charlie, so you think about that analogy and you think about one other thing. The big banks and the large banks in the banking system is responsible for each other under the insurance process. So when a company fails, we all have to keep the FDIC insurance fund funded. So we have a stark interest in making sure the place is well regulated because it's our shareholders, customers, who pay if another bank goes down. And so the stability is really important to the system. So we're saying responsible regulation, and that's why you don't hear this, oh, let's go out and pull it all back. It's, wait a second, a lot of this was really right. We never disagree with it. We run the companies that way. The question is...
A lot of the regulation from Dodd-Frank.
And all the different stuff.
I tell you what, you could actually see that in terms of, I mean, I've talked to some banking executives who lobbied against Dodd-Frank, but they were only lobbying against certain aspects of Dodd-Frank. In fact, they were perfectly happy to have certain aspects of Dodd-Frank.
Right. And so that's why I said capital, liquidity, the stress tests are very valuable because what that says to the American society and the world, because they run them in Europe and other places, and they build a pattern, is we can test every year, and then we test every quarter, whether these guys could survive a really bad outcome. Really, really bad outcome. And if they can, that gives confidence the system. It'll be there, and in times of stress. And we're there to help the real economy. So those things, I think, the question then is, like anything else, you get a pendulum swings, and how do you bring it back, and then how it's implemented, and then how many different rules that have too many interpretations are getting far away from what they were trying to stop.
Do you think there needs to be more regulation of shadow banking?
Well, that's the question of the tent. So we said one of the things we liked about Dodd-Frank was it put everybody under the tent. So Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, J.P. Morgan, Bank of America, we're all in the same regulatory scheme. Right. It might have nuances but same regulatory scheme. Shadow banking, by definition, is outside that, and I think, the problem with that is it can do two things. One, it doesn't have
shadow banking. Explain what shadow banking is. Hedge funds.
Well, it's hedge funds or non-regulated lenders or financial vehicles that do middle market lending. And the problem with those things is that they tend to come and go, and in times of stress, and that causes disruption. So if it's very small, sort of who cares? As it gets bigger, it can have a bigger impact, and so. Before the crisis in the mortgage market, most of the mortgage market was by companies that weren't regulated, Countrywide being the leading one, which we had to clean up. And that ended up disrupting the whole business model. In the securities firms, same thing. So I think that's, when we say shadow banking, we think there's too much going on outside, and it needs to be brought back under the tent. That has to be done carefully, because some of the reasons why it's out there is because the rules have to be amended to allow it to come back in.
Donald Trump campaigned as a voice for the people who did not have a voice, primarily, and he campaigned against the establishment. He did not campaign against Wall Street in the same way that Bernie Sanders campaigned against Wall Street. But what we see as he puts his government together is a lot of people, a lot of rich people, and a lot of people a number of people from Wall Street's Treasury Secretary and the Commerce Secretary nominee come from Wall Street. He seems to be appointing people he knows. And
is that different than any other president that we ever had elected? It's their choice. They got the mandate from the people. They won the election.
So he's actually, you say to everybody, let him appoint the people that he feels can get the job that he promised he could do.
Right.
If he thinks Wall Street types, people with that kind of experience, are the best people to help him accomplish the objectives he promised his supporters he would deliver, then
and we have to hold him accountable to get the job done. I mean, as citizens, not as
his people, and then hold him accountable if he doesn't achieve his goals.
Right. And I think, but I'm trying to think, if you think back about going back to the early days, at some point they quit having the vice president be the guy who finished second, because that caused a little disruption, hard to run a government. So I don't think this is a new concept. I think, anytime you've had 8 years of, President Obama and the Democrats and the administration. Before that, you had 8 years of Republicans. Every time it switches, there's great hand-wringing about, oh, my God, who's coming in. It works through. It works through. We wouldn't be here,
from the system is that strong.
I think the system is that strong.
In 2008, when I would talk to Tim Geithner and people like that, they would say the most important surprise for them was how fragile the system was.
Right.
The U.S. economic system, and how close it came to tottering. Have we eliminated that?
Well, two things. Tim was right. Tim was right, but it actually started in 2006. It took 2 years to get to that fragility. Exactly. It's ground through. And that's what we got to always remember. What went wrong in 5 and 6 and really started happening in 6 when house prices quit going up. That led to 8. Everybody thinks Lehman Brothers. That was kind of the end of the trail, but that's more of it. It was pretty ugly there for a while, and corporate America quit funding at that point, and so, but. What happened with the fixes is, so the question, can you test that hypothesis that the system isn't as fragile and they're fix it? That's what the stress tests do.
Right.
You basically emulate a more draconian element, and you show that the companies come through. In our company's case and others, we come through with twice as much capital as we started with before the crisis. So apparently, you have twice or 3 times as much capital now. So those are. That's what all this did that worked. Now the question is, where do we stop and start going forward with it and trade and have a better trade-off between the safety and soundness and the growth engine?
We've had these interesting things, and this has to do with politics and finance, which is climate. And you had the president, raise questions, first of all, about climate change as a candidate. Then you had him say in one or more interviews, he thought there may be some connectivity between human activity and climate change. Then he invited Al Gore to come in and see him and his daughter. Then he appointed someone who was a huge opponent of EPA to run EPA.
This guy's going to be, Mr. Trump is going to be a little harder for us to figure out, I think,
I would say.
if you think about all that. But let's step back. If you think about corporate America, whether it was COP21 is a crowning thing for a lot of work, but we all have.
This is the Paris Agreement.
The Paris Agreement, yeah. We all have tremendous programs. We have a program. It's $125 billion against environmental initiatives in our company. It's part of our sustainable platform, we call it, which has a lot more than that. And we went from 25 to 50 to 125 billion. That's green bonds. That's how the buildings we have and the LEED Platinum certification. It's how we lower our requirements. It's how we have reduced our are financing new energies to help the cycle change from old energy sources to new energy sources. We can't stop this stuff day one. We believe in the science of Bank of America. We're pushing, but you have to
believe in science at the Bank of America.
We believe
climate change is real. Deniers, we believe in science.
We believe in climate change is happening. We believe we've got to get off fossil fuels, but you need time to make it happen, or else. We can't turn off all lights in this building, or you and I would be talking.
Well, on the other hand, Google just announced that by end of 2017, they'll be able to use alternative sources of energy.
We're 2020. We made the same announcement.
You made the same decision.
3 years later.
But doesn't that show a commitment by corporate America?
Absolutely.
A belief that climate change is real and that everybody has to be involved.
Right. And by the way, if you go across corporate America, that's my point, is we've all made those decisions. The debate gets into
climate change is real, and
that we're all making this. Yeah, exactly. Climate change. We all have initiatives. The question, Charlie, quite frankly, is, what's the length of that arc? And Mr. Gore and I have sat and talked about it. And some people believe that arc's tomorrow morning, and you got to get off it tomorrow. And some people believe, you have to do it. Our view is we have to help finance it, because there's a $1 trillion a year financing demand to bring us from where we are to where we want to be.
To create alternative fuels.
To create enough to
alternative energy.
Because the question for us as American society is we can't be, I don't know what the right word would be, arrogant or selfish, as well as other developed societies, saying, hey, we got here this way, and you in Africa are not going to get a power grid because we don't believe you can do it. We got to figure out ways to finance their progress without following our path. And so, look, we don't change how we run Bank of America, through election cycles. So we have this program, our environmental program, goes back to my predecessor's predecessor, and we will continue to drive it. And we'll work with clients to help make the call. That was Hugh, to Ken, to me. And so it's been, made, doubled, and redoubled, and now 3.5 times, I guess, whatever the math would be. And so, as you think about that, but I don't think I'm different from a lot of CEOs. We're driving this. It's just a question of being told exactly the pace to do it, or figure out how to help and figure out the right strategies, and figure out strategies that can actually get done. And that's where we worked a lot with the UN and others on trying to finance, thinking about what the financing needs were to accomplish this purpose, and spend a lot of time to figure it out, because it's a huge demand. It's going to take the world to do this. You can't just snap your fingers and we all go to any.
But you got to make a decision to go forward.
You have to make a decision and keep driving. And that's what we've done in the company. That's what we've done with it. That's what I think most companies have done.
Could what happened at Wells Fargo have happened at Bank of America?
We run the business to really not. We run the business to get depth of wallet and balance, and we don't sell up. We have 10% less checking accounts we did 8-9 years ago. They're more important, more primary, and it's just a different model. Now, we've obviously been asked this question a lot, and we've had to do a lot of work, and the regulators are looking at all the big banks, all the banks actually, and so, but it really comes back to the way we serve our purpose. We don't sell to sell. We actually really focus on depth of relationship, and a lot of people say that, but we actually that's what we focus on and measure. So when we don't just try to get market share. We really want Charlie Rose's basic checking account where all the money goes through. We want his credit card he's going to use. We want his auto loan, and we just work and work and work at that. And so that just starts you that we don't have sales goals just to sell. We have sales goals integrated in that relationship thing, and then we balance them with customer satisfaction and other goals. And we haven't found anything.
If you look at the high-tech world, I mean, there's Apple, and there is Amazon, and there is Facebook, and there is Google, and there is Microsoft. You look at the world of big banks, there is J.P. Morgan, there's Wells Fargo, and there's Bank of America. How are they different?
Yeah, the weighting of the business models is differently, and we're probably between, JP is a little more weighted to the institutional side of the house, and Wells is more weighted towards the retail side of the house. What makes us unique is we have one of the largest investment bank and capital markets capabilities, and we have the largest retail platform in the United States, and we have the largest wealth management business. That's what makes our business model unique. And so we go to war with those guys every day. It's extremely competitive, but in the end of the day, we have, we admire them as competitors, but we go to war to win against them. But our business model is a little bit more hybrid between capital markets and trading and things and wealth management and retail, where each of those are weighted a little bit differently.
Is mergers and acquisitions still a big part of it at all?
No.
No.
It's illegal.
You leave that to people like, it's illegal.
It's illegal.
I didn't realize that.
Going back to when the Bank of America bought a company called Fleet, in 2003 and 2004, shortly thereafter, that was the first person that pushed above 10% deposit share in the United States, and there was a law passed that said you can't acquire if you're above 10% anybody. So, and we're above 10%. You can grow organically, and we're up to probably 14% or something like that, but you can't acquire. So one of the nice things I have in my life is I can't make any acquisitions of anybody that has a deposit franchise in the United States. So whereas my predecessors for all the companies that we've put together over the years had to think about what was next, I just think about how do I do a great job for the customers and shareholders and the communities, and it frankly saves us a lot of energy.
So what's your 5-year plan, so to speak?
Our 5-year plan is to continue to, if you think about it, sort of 3 broad group of customers. On the consumer side is to drive the digital world, whatever name you want to use, gig, and we have to drive that, and then just keep, just drive the transformation of how people live from physical to digital. In the wealth management side, it's to drive the new asset management styles they talk about. You hear about things called artificial intelligence, robo-advising, all that stuff. Is drive that in. Against, we have to lower the cost of investing. And on the institutional side, it's really to maintain our position as a top-tier player in capital markets. But quite frankly, that business, Tom Montag and team do a great job on it, but we don't try to just grow it for its own sake. It really interfaces with all our other businesses. But if you really said what will people remember Bank of America if we get it right over the next 5 years, is the progress we continue to make on the consumer and the wealth management side to continue to transform those business models, which have been huge already. I mean, it is pretty amazing what the team has done the last 6 or 7 years in consumer banking.
Who has the largest footprint overseas?
In terms of U.S. banks?
Yeah.
As a percentage, maybe Citi, and as a size, probably JP.
I left Citi out of that. Actually, they were the 40.
Yeah, and so if you think about it, think about Citi having more.
Right.
Their U.S. retail presence is smaller, but I think JP is the biggest around the world, and we're, overseas, we're probably, third or fourth in a given product category, which is fine. It's good, and then we'll continue to try to grow all of it.
So if you look at the global economy, where are we? Obviously, we had fluctuating oil prices, and energy became a factor. We had a slowdown in China. That became a factor. We had the rise of populism. That became a factor. What is driving the global economy?
You just laid out an interesting year, and since the last time I talked to you, all that happened.
Yes.
And none of it was that predicted, really.
Yeah, no, that's right. That's true.
So you start from two basic things. One is, we have a tremendous research team that a woman named Candace Browning runs for us. It's just tremendous, and #1 rate 5-6 years in a row. So that's a dynasty even compared to the Duke basketball program. But she does a great job, and so they picked a little over 3% for GDP growth in the world next year,
right,
and about 2% for the U.S. And you always have to start with the U.S. to some degree because it's so big.
So GDP growth around the world 3%,
over 3%, 3.2, something like that.
Right. What about China? 6 and 7?
Yeah, they're probably low. They're probably in the 6s and that. But think about China. China's always hard to figure out what it means. But our people are constructed to say China will be okay. It's going to have ebbs and flows. It's in a massive transformation that it's hard to imagine outside, but they think it's okay. And they think that India gets a little, you have people backing off on India. Last year when I was here, I think we talked about India being a place the world was going to, and they're backing off. And Mr. Modi's he's still trying to make some changes, and sometimes a disruptive economic growth for, with the cash and currency changes he made. But I think there's great prospects in India. It continues to develop, and I think he's a leader that's very disciplined about we're going to go there, and he just keeps driving the country ahead. But I think, so if you say, well, the worries in the world, they're the same worries that were last time. Will Europe hold it together? Right. With all the different things, with the Italy situation the last week, producing that. And then I think the worry of China, because the impact on China to the U.S. is not an issue as much as it is reverberating through all the other economies, especially Europe. Europe sends more to China than we do. We buy a lot from China. And if the dollar goes up and the Chinese currency goes down, we can buy more. But the reality is we send stuff, but not as much. Europe's much more dependent on exports to China, so that you have to watch the reverberation.
Especially Germany.
And then the rest of the Asia obviously plays off of China. So, but I think our experts and I believe it'll kind of bump along. But if you think about the U.S., what we're seeing in the U.S. is spending is accelerating this year. So if you think about 14, 15, 16, you've seen the rate of spending go up, and you're seeing it accelerate during 16 again, and that's good news because if consumers in America spend, 2/3 of the economy is going to go in the right direction in the U.S. And then if you see that play out in the world when you have this one big economy pushing in the right direction, that's a good anchor to windward for the rest of the world. So the rest of the world, and that's been really what's happened last year. The U.S., even though it didn't grow as much as we'd all want, because it kept growing, the bumps, that parade of interestings you laid out there all came true in a way that nobody predicted, but it didn't knock anybody off course because the U.S. plugged along. And that is a testimony to the power of the capitalism in the U.S., plus the policies have been very accommodative to growth.
How would you assess Barack Obama's management of the economy?
I think he came in at the most difficult times.
It could not have been more difficult.
And the tail end of the Bush administration was no cup of tea either. They had to make decisions. They had to do unprecedented things, especially in the lattest part of 08, even before. And I think they solved the problems they had to solve. And I think in the end of the day, they created the stimulus, which people argue great measure whether it worked precisely. But you just need to do stuff to show that you're going to try. You weren't going to let. And by the way, if you think about the U.S. relative to the rest of the world, think about this thing. Think where we are today. Think of between the banking system here versus banking system in Italy. Right. It's 10 years later, guys. What's going on? And so I think they made the right choices. They forced the recapitalization. We are lucky that we have the depth of capital markets and the enthusiasm and capitalism, which is good in the United States, that came in and invested. That was willing to restructure enterprises. And frankly, you had management teams and enterprise that said, hey, we got to hunker down and get ourselves in shape fast under the punishment of shareholder regimes, shareholders that would just pound you if we weren't moving fast enough. I woke up one day and we kept talking about capital levels. I said, guys, remember, we don't have to have this capital 2019. In other words, this is 2014 and 15 that we're already at. People are saying, why aren't you here today? And you're saying that because it isn't true to 2019. In Europe, they're still making a way there. So I think Mr. Obama and President Obama and the administration did the right things to put the thing on a course and pushed it along. So I think when we look back, this is a decent time. Could it have grown faster? That's the great debate. And then, frankly, that probably played out a little bit in the election. Not Mr. Obama. He was finished, but in terms of his terms. But that debate will be played out, and somebody will tell us a story in a couple of years, 10 years of what happened. But the reality is, given those tough times, they did a marvelous job of getting the country settled back down, getting the economy settled back down, and providing the kind of leadership it took out. The question now is what policies need for a different time, and that's the debate going on.
Thank you for coming.
My pleasure.
Pleasure to have you here.
It's good to be here again.
Brian Moynihan, Bank of America. Back in a moment. Stay with us. Kenneth Lonergan is here. His newest film, Manchester by the Sea, stars Casey Affleck, Michelle Williams, and Lucas Hedges. Affleck plays Lee Chandler, a man who returns to his hometown to look after his nephew following the death of his older brother. Variety calls the film a beautifully textured, richly enveloping drama. Manchester by the Sea has been named Best Film of the Year by the National Board of Review. Here is a look.
I don't understand.
Which part are you having trouble with?
Well, I can't be his guardian.
Well,
I mean, I can't.
Well, naturally, I assumed Joe had discussed all this with you.
No. He didn't. No.
I have to say I'm somewhat taken aback.
He can't live with me. I live in one room.
Well, but Joe has provided for Patrick's upkeep. Food, clothes, etc. And the house and the boat are owned outright.
I can't commute from Boston every day until he turns 18.
I think the idea was that you would relocate.
Relocate to where?
Well, if you look, well, as you can see, your brother worked everything out extremely carefully.
But he can't have,
yes,
can't have meant that.
I'm pleased to have Kenneth Lonergan back at this table. So when you watch that, what do you see? What do your eyes see?
I see Casey and just how lost he is and how surprised he is and how just all the turmoil inside of him. And also Josh Hamilton, who plays the scene with him, was one of my best friends and has been in many of my plays. I just love the way I just love actors. Just the way, just all the little things that are happening moment to moment. You just can't take in what's happening, and Josh is totally thrown because he thought it was going to be fairly routine, and that's the kind of thing that makes scenes work for me. Anne Roth, the costume designer, who's a very good friend of mine, saw the film early on, and she said, I just keep seeing Casey's eyes, and this scene particularly, this is actually the first scene we shot. This was our first day of shooting this scene, and it was, I felt we were off to a really good start. Off to a good start, yeah, I thought.
Every good director I know loves actors. I mean, can you be a good director and not love actors?
I think so. I think it depends on what your interest is. I don't know that Hitchcock famously didn't seem to. He said he didn't. It's a little unclear whether he did or not.
Yeah, and he was a damn good director.
And Stanley Kubrick, I think, saw actors was a little less interested in in delving into the depths of the performance, but very interested in human beings. So I think it just depends. But I think most directors are very interested in the actors primarily.
Is it different in directing stage versus film?
No, it's the same process with different tools. You want to get the actors to a place where they're comfortable, where they're spontaneous, within some artificial within our artificial guidelines. And on a set, you have multiple takes, changing the camera, you have multiple takes, changing the angles of the camera, and you have a big crew looking at you. And in a play, you have to do the same thing over and over again and still do it in a fresh way, but you have a room full of people watching you and reacting, and there's just different things to cope with.
Do they become part of a different set every day in the theater? Because they're different.
Yes. Yeah, I once saw Christopher Walken interviewed, and he said he thought at the bottom of every cast list it should say the audience.
Yeah.
Because they're there, and you don't want to play just to them, but you'd be false if you ignored the fact that there were 200, 500 people in the room. It's a little hard to quantify. You take them in some way, and their energy and their different responses informs that night's performance, and it's always different because the audience is always different.
If you're a good stage actor, should you be a good film actor?
I think it's easier to go from stage to film than from film to stage. I don't think that used to be the case when film was newer. But I think now that there's so many actors who get comfortable in front of a camera and are very minimal and quiet and can interact at a small level, it's a little hard for them sometimes to control a whole performance throughout a 2-hour play. Your voice has to be louder, you have to be turned outward, you have to not feel false doing that, and then there's doing the same thing every night, but keeping it fresh between yourself, the other actors, and the audience.
How do they do that?
I don't know. I don't know. They work very hard. They work very hard.
You've never thought about acting?
Only for fun, and I have such a narrow range. I have no I used to act in high school, and I like acting, and I'm in each one of my films in a very small part. But I can't. If I can either do it or I can't do it, depending on the part. I mean, even if I'll help a friend with his or her audition, if I'm reading the other parts, some of them I don't know how to read, and some of them I do, and I have no technique to get me to the ones that I don't know how to read.
So the best actors have a technique to get them where they want to go.
Yeah, they get the part, and some of the parts relate to them right away, and some of them don't, and they have many ways to get to where they need to go.
How about Casey in this case?
Well, I think Casey related to the part right away, but had a lot of questions, and that was one of the fun things about working with him, was he had a lot of questions.
Here's what you told somebody, film comment.
Yeah.
He said he has a million questions. He's like a relentless detective. He wants to know everything he possibly could so that he has a foundation from which to perform a scene. You know, he's bringing everything he has to it by being the guy, and I'm bringing everything I can think of to help him from when I was pretending to be the guy when I was writing it. So I think I have at least one version of the character that is useful for the actor to hear about. But at some point, I step back, and he has to become the person. And at that point, there's a whole gang of other things that are Casey's, and Casey's alone that come into play. That's it really is about an actor's craft right there.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, when I try to act, if it's not something for me, my own voice and my own self kind of gets in the way. And I think for really good actors, when they're trying to act a part that's not like them, they are able to somehow use themselves to become this other character. I can do that in my imagination, but I don't have to. But if I'm not the one speaking, talking, and being looked at, it's a lot easier for me.
What do you like about Manchester by the Sea as a movie?
I like the tremendous effort the characters are making to do the right thing by each other, even though they're carrying this terrible emotional burden around. Casey's character is so stricken by what's happened to him, and he's still, every step of the way, doesn't want to just take care of his nephew, but take care of him properly. He doesn't start out wanting to have a personal relationship with him. He just wants to get him set up. You know, the premise of the movie is that Casey's brother dies, and he's given guardianship of his nephew, which he doesn't want. But that part's very obvious in the story, but what's not so obvious sometimes is how he refuses to just send the kid away. Like, he could easily send him to relatives in Minnesota. Mm-hmm. He could send him back to his mother, who's very troubled and problematic, but he's sticking it out as best he can, despite the fact that he's in terrible duress from what's happened to him earlier in the story.
Okay, take a look at this, and then we'll come back. Here it is.
Things are a little bit up in the air.
No, I can take care of it as far as the general maintenance is concerned, but that motor is going to go at some point.
I'm taking care of it. There's no allotment for a new motor. Unless, George, you know someone who wants to buy it.
Wait a second, I'm not selling it.
We're going to be in Boston anyway.
What? Since when are we supposed to be in Boston?
Just take it easy.
Well, whatever you decide, it's going to bleed you dry just sitting here.
We don't know exactly what we're doing.
Well, you know, he can always stay with us if he wants to come up weekends.
Do you want to be his guardian?
Well,
he doesn't want to be my guardian, for Christ's sake. He's got
we're trying to lose some kids at this point.
No, we're trying to work out the logistics, so I didn't know.
Pretty good, but
Jesus Christ,
we've always got a sofa for him anytime he wants.
George,
you know that, right?
That's all right. I know
he's
that.
welcome anytime.
I understand. I know. Thank you.
So when Lee left Manchester, what was his state of mind?
Devastated. I mean, I don't know how much of the story you want to give away on the show.
Not too much, but
he's left town because of an unspeakable tragedy, and his life is essentially destroyed. And I think if it were up to him, he'd just go. But his brother's not well. He's got congestive heart failure, which is a chronic deteriorating condition, and requires help taking care of his kid and just generally help. So generally needs help. So he just goes about an hour and a half away so he can be on hand if he's needed. And he goes into a kind of monastic existence in Quincy, which is a town south of Boston.
And then he gets the note to come back.
And then he comes back when he and it's implied in the story, and it was in the screenplay, that he comes back periodically when Joe has to be hospitalized, and he comes back to take care of the kid when there's no one else to do it. So he's been in touch, but he's detached himself completely from the family and from the town that he grew up in.
What kind of stories do you like to tell?
I like to tell stories about people who are dealing with things that are too big for them.
Like grief.
Grief, the weight of other people's requirements, the fact that the world never does what you want it to do, death, other people generally, institutional difficulties with lawyers, difficulties with doctors, difficulties with the law, difficulties just getting through life.
It sounds like you like your characters to be in trouble.
Yeah, well, it makes for drama and comedy, so it's hard to imagine enjoying a movie where everyone's just sitting around happily for an hour and a half.
This is 2016.
Yeah.
Your last film was 2005.
Yeah.
I mean, you've been working on theater in between.
Yes. Well, the film, Margaret, my last film, wasn't really completed until 2012 because of difficulties and procedural problems with the editing in the studio and all that. But, yeah, so I wrote and directed a play in 2009 called The Starry Messenger that Matthew Broderick did. We did at the New Group. I wrote and directed a play called Medieval Play, which I did at Signature Theater in 2011. And last year I wrote a play which Neil Pepe directed at the Atlantic Theater Company called Hold On to Me Darling. So I've been pretty busy in the theater and writing this and working up to direct this along.
Is it your goal to simply continue to go back and forth between theater and film?
Yeah, I don't see why not. I really like both. I like them both quite a bit. They're very different. They're very challenging. They're very rewarding. When it goes well, it's just really exciting and gratifying. It's great to sit with an audience and watch everyone kind of participating.
Is it different for you to sit alone in a screening room and see a film versus watching it with an audience?
Yes, it's completely different.
You can feel their own...
You feel what's happening with the audience. You also immediately pretend you're in the audience and you have all these criticisms you didn't have before, and then when it goes well and you can feel that it's going well, you feel really good about it. You just see it from other people's point of view the moment they walk in the room.
What's the most satisfying thing about directing film?
I guess just when you feel like you've more or less successfully put all the elements together. You've got the shots come out the way you want, anything, there's so many things to do. Like there's the filming, there's this production design, there's the edit, there's the sound design, there's the music, there's the cast. So whenever any of those elements come together and make the scene kind of sing, then that's really a good feeling.
And when it doesn't sing?
Then it's very, very, very upsetting. And you just it's a nagging feeling that you've just got to fix it. And it doesn't ever quite go away. There's 10 minutes worth of little fixes I would still like to make in this movie, but at some point
you have to let it go.
You have to let it go because your improvements stop being improvements, and you lose the thread, and you got to stop.
You lose the thread, meaning what? That somehow you can just overdo it and
yeah, like you say, well, that shot's too long. That's the wrong take, and then
crazy.
And it's at some point you stop hearing. It's like if it's a symphony, it's like trying to fix it note by note instead of hearing the sound and writing down what you hear.
Take a look at this. This is another scene. Here it is with Michelle Williams as well.
I don't have anything big to say.
It's okay.
I know you've been around, and I thought...
Just been getting Patrick settled in.
It seems like he's doing pretty good, huh, considering?
I think he is, yeah.
I guess you don't know this, but I really kept in touch with Joe. It's been kind of weird for me not seeing Patrick. Oh, okay, I didn't know.
If you could see him if you want.
Could we ever have lunch?
Us, you and me?
Yeah.
They're great.
You love it, don't you?
I love them. Yeah. I love them. They're just so great. I don't know how they do it. There's this incredible feeling and incredible emotional life, and it just looks like two real people having a really, really difficult discussion.
What goes in your head when you're cutting that scene? I mean, this is two people in conversation.
It's so complicated that you have to just do it by instinct in a way. You have 4 or 5 takes on either side. You have a two-shot. It's also we had 2 cameras going at the same time, and and there's no performance issues. Sometimes we'll just start with a certain take that you like, and then build from there.
So you get one place that starts it.
Yeah, and then once you have that in place, then you can. But you somewhat have to feel your way through. My editor and I, Jennifer Lame, this was not that hard of a scene to edit because the performances were so good on all the takes, but we wanted the editing to be up to the level of the performances. And I think you just follow the path of what's happening in the situation as best you can. For instance, we could see her say, do you want to have lunch or not? And I think it's very important to see it, because you see her make that decision, you see her her head turns up, and you see how, and she kind of blurts it out, and then you must see his reaction, because the wind just goes out of him, and he has this beautiful reaction. So those are two shots you want. You put them in the machine, and then you're off and running a little bit. It's just interesting, wherever you put the camera, it changes the feeling of the conversation a little bit. And it's amazing what you can do, how many different ways you can do it. So in a way, you can't do it. You have to follow some instinct. And the other funny thing about editing is you're in the editing room, and you put together a few shots, and then you'll both think, we held on him too long there. And you have no idea why, but everyone in the room will agree with that. But it feels right to cut a little sooner or a little later. And I don't know what that is. I don't know if it's akin to a musical sense mentally, or...
I think it's probably music and experience, too.
I guess so.
Some sense of... Yeah, I mean, I don't think you're born with it necessarily, although, I've been in editing rooms with people who you just knew how their instinctive sense was so strong.
Yeah, and it's so important. I mean, and I guess it's also if you maybe could go back and say, okay, this is the story of a girl who builds up to ask her ex-husband to have lunch, and then after that happens, it becomes a story of a man who's talking to someone in a way he can't bear, and he's got to get out of the conversation, and then the next shot it becomes a different... I think there must be a narrative in the editing that you don't think through intellectually, but that you're following as you're following the conversation and the behavior between the two characters.
He's so damaged that he's scared of reconciliation.
He can't talk to her. It's too painful. He's lost her. He's lost everything, and he can't... He's barely getting through the day just talking to other people, and she's at the center of his distress, and she's not. They still care for each other, but the relationship is over.
Do you ever want to make a comedy?
Yeah, I'd like to make a comedy, and this movie has a lot. This movie, believe it or not, has a lot of laughs in it, and I like humor just as much as anything else, and I like to put humor in everything I do. That scene we just saw is pretty melancholy, but there's quite a lot of humor in the movie. Casey's really funny. Lucas is funny. C.J. Wilson, who was in the boat with them, is wonderful. He's a wonderful actor.
Yeah, I mean, Affleck said, Casey said, Kenny never writes without some humor. He's funny. He sees the human situations. It doesn't undermine the drama. It might make the tragedy felt even more.
I think so. I hope so. I think, my goal is to have it seem like it could be real, or that it is real. And if it's going to feel real, it's going to have some humor in it.
His life has humor.
It certainly does, and in very strange places. There are no joke zones, and they're pretty grim. But I find in ordinary life, anyway, they don't last for long, and they don't extend as, you and I might be in a no-joke zone, but someone backstage is not in the same zone.
No. This sounds like a stupid question. Are you surprised by the response to the film?
I am a little.
It's gotten a huge response.
I am a little, because I was worried. It's about, it's a film about grief. I also think it's a film about how much people care about each other through grief, and it's something that everyone's experienced. So in that way, I'm very gratified that people like it, but I'm a little surprised.
Much success to you.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Manchester by the Sea is the film. Thank you for joining us. See you next time.
Welcome to the